You are listening to the For Flourishing's Sake podcast by Frederica Roberts. Welcome to episode 47. Looking at the countries where most listeners to this podcast are from, I think most of you are now on a well-earned, much-needed summer holiday break. With that in mind, over the coming weeks, I am bringing you some extended podcast episodes where you will be able to listen to the replays of the For Flourishing's Sake book launch events. Today, I bring you the first half of the first panel discussion of the book launch extravaganza. This panel was recorded live on the 18th of June, the day the Kindle edition of For Flourishing's Sake was published. The panel was chaired by Adele Bates, Education and Behaviour Specialist from the UK, and featured the following panellists. Fabian de Fabiani, Assistant Headteacher at Townley Grammar School and Director of Character at the Odyssey Trust for Education. Fabian is also a Policy Advisor for the UK Government's Schools Inspection Body in England and a Keynote Speaker. Becca Komicio, School Psychologist at New Canaan Country School in Connecticut, USA. Rhiannon McGee, Head of Positive Education at Geelong Grammar School in Australia. And Elke Paul, Positive Education Consultant, Professional Development Expert and Wellbeing Conference Organiser with IPEN. Elke is based in Germany. In the first half of this panel discussion, they begin to address the what and the how of positive education. They share their thoughts on what positive and character education are, give tangible, practical examples of implementation in their schools, and share tips on how to instigate culture change and embed these approaches to education. I have cut out my introduction to the panel discussion and gone straight to Adele as she introduces herself and the panel. And of course, you will find links to all the panellists' Twitter handles and the link to the page where you can watch back all the panel video recordings on this episode's page on the forflourishingsake.com website.
So, as that wonderful introduction from Fred said, I'm a behaviour and education specialist. So I work with pupils with SEMH, social, emotional, mental health issues. I work in schools with them, as well as training other staff to work with those pupils, supporting staff, supporting schools, local authorities. And I have my own book coming out next year that I'm working on that is called Miss I Don't Give a Shit. So, I have the delight of welcoming the panel. So first of all, we are going to welcome Rhiannon McGee, who is over in Australia. Hello, Rhiannon.
Hello, Adele. Thanks for having me.
And what time did you say you're on over there?
It's 9:30 in the evening on a Thursday.
Okay. Are you in school tomorrow or online on school tomorrow?
We actually had our last day of teaching today. It's the end of term, so just a couple of meetings tomorrow, so it's all fun.
Good. Well, thank you. So, as you might have guessed, Rhiannon works in schools. She's the Head of Positive Education at Geelong Grammar School, and you shall see her Twitter handle on her screen, which is RHIM McGee. And the question I'm going to ask Rhiannon and all of the panel as I introduce them is just to give us a little bit of a tasty flavour to kick us off. In one sentence, please could you just describe for us what positive education is?
At this point in time, I would define positive education as the skills and practices to support wellbeing, drawing on positive psychology and other disciplines.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And I heard that semicolon in your sentence, making it still one sentence. Very clever. Nice skills there. Okay, next I'd like to introduce Becca Komicio from the USA, who is a school psychologist in New Canaan Country School. Her Twitter handle is Becca Komicio. And hello, Becca. Whereabouts are you now? What time are you on?
Hello, Adele. Thank you for having me. I am in Connecticut, just a little bit south of where my school is in New Canaan, and it is just after 7:30 in the morning.
Okay, thank you. And your one sentence, please, to sum up positive education.
Okay, so this will be a challenge, but one sentence would be that I see positive education, especially in my little neck of the woods, in my school, New Canaan Country School, as a framework from which all other aspects of education arise. So it's looking at the science of positive psychology in order to inform academic programming, character education, nutrition and health, sports, discipline, positive discipline, and really respect. Our mission at Newport Country School is to respect childhood, respect the integral nature of childhood and whole children. So positive education is the framework from which everything we do arises.
Thank you. I love your header sentence there. That's great. Cheers. And we are going to get to know a bit more about you and your settings later on. So next we move over to Elke Paul, who's in Germany, I believe. I don't know whereabouts. We'll find that out. She is a positive education consultant, a professional development expert, a wellbeing conference organizer with IPEN, and her Twitter handle is Elke Pos Ed. Hello, Elke.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. So please start off. Tell us whereabouts exactly you are in Germany and what time you're on.
I think it's roughly 1:40 it is in Berlin in the afternoon. And I'm sitting in Berlin, close to the center. So.
Yeah, thank you. And do you have one sentence that you can describe positive education in?
So the definition that I use often, because it's a quick one, is positive education trains well-being and human values so we can establish a better relationship with ourselves, with the people around us, and with the world we live in. That's how I would describe.
Gorgeous. Thank you. There's some tweetables here. I suppose watch Marie Forleo. She always has tweetables. These are real tweetables. Okay. And thank you, Elke. Let's move on finally to Fabian de Fabiani. And I believe you are in the UK.
Yeah, morning everyone.
Whereabouts are you?
Afternoon. I'm in South London. So I'm actually in school. I'm in school today. So Townley Grammar School in Bexley. I'm in my office. I don't really have a big red door behind me at home. So this is
thank you. Yeah. Okay. So Fabian is the assistant head teacher at Townley Grammar School and director of character, Odyssey Trust for Education, policy advisor for Ofsted, and keynote speaker. And his Twitter feed is FDE Fab, which is on the screen there. So thank you, Fabian. Thank you for being your office, Fabian. That's great. Love that. Okay, do you have a sentence you can sum up positive education with?
Yes, I think positive education really is simply developing and embedding a sense of purpose and optimism amongst young people. That's how we've approached it at Townley, and that's kind of been my own practice and how I've tried to approach it. So it's inspiring and developing a sense of purpose and optimism within the school systems.
Thank you. Okay, and Frederica, obviously you've already introduced yourself, but I would like to hear your sentence, please, lady.
I thought I was going to get away with that then. I think positive education, I'm going to go with the IPEN definition because I like the IPEN definition. It's the combination of educating for well-being and character as well as educating for academic achievement. So it's not that we're talking about just doing well-being to the expense of all else. It's actually about doing the two together, and that when you actually do look after well-being and character, then it supports the academic achievement and development as well of the children. And within that, it's a very long sentence, I would say that it's about the whole school. It's not just about doing well-being lessons or anything like that. It's actually about making sure that the school supports that.
Lovely, thank you. So I am going to, just to make everyone at home really jealous, I'm going to show my paper copy. As contributors we've already got, go get it. But you can see I've started my reading of it, and the start of this book really gives us a good overview, firstly, of what positive education is, and secondly, it starts looking at this difference between positive education and character education, which I know are often kind of banded around as if they're the same thing, or aren't they, or which way is this? So I just want to clear this up right at the start so we really know what we're talking about. So Frederica, would you want to kick off with that? anyway, just to define those differences for us.
Okay, yeah. So the way I see it might not be the way everybody sees it, and it'll be really interesting actually to hear from the other panelists in terms of their views on the differences and similarities. I think there is a lot of overlap. If you look at a lot of stuff that's been said about and written about by academics and by educators about what positive education aims to achieve and what character education aims to achieve, there's a lot of overlap that the word flourishing is used a lot, hence the name of the book, For Flourishing's Sake, because that term is used in both fields, really. The way I look at it, character is actually a massive element of positive psychology, looking at character strengths and how they underpin our psychological well-being. And so I kind of see character education as being a big, massive element of the whole positive education picture. Positive education including other stuff like the policies, procedures, the staff well-being, the interventions, the ethos of a school, all of that kind of thing. But having said that, there's also, I think, differences in countries and cultures and how we actually use those terms. And in the UK, for example, not many people actually would use positive education, but they would use character education. They talk a lot about a lot of the stuff that I mentioned when I talk about positive education. So it's a bit fluid, I would say, from my perspective.
Thank you, Frederica. So I want to pick on that point that you've said about us. I think we have got some echoes going on, haven't we? Thank you, Rebecca, just for pointing that out. I don't know whether we can just mute if we're not speaking. Thank you. So just pick up on your point, Frederica, about the fact that actually it is different culturally and in different countries. So I'm going to switch over to Australia and see if we've got a comparison there. So in terms of the difference or the similarities between positive and character education, how does that work over where you are, Rhiannon?
Yeah, probably in Australia, the terminology character education isn't used as much as I've noticed in America, England and other places. I think the wellbeing, the movement in Australia has really risen out of an ongoing movement around wellbeing in Australia, and positive education and the application of positive psychology in educational settings as an evolution of that. And certainly, 10 or 11 years down the track here, our thinking continues to evolve, whereby we have felt that one of the challenges with positive psychology in the first iteration, perhaps, of positive education is that it has been a little bit individualistic, my well-being, and so on. And there are elements of POSED, obviously, which draw on character strengths, which draw on meaning, purpose, and making a contribution to the world. So our feeling is that as we've evolved, there's been more of an emphasis on the we, not me, and I think that's reflected in the field more broadly, in the field of POSPSych more broadly, just a maturation. So I suppose my understanding of character is more about evolving into individuals who are going to make a positive contribution in the world, and I think that has been a little bit beyond what the initial intentions of positive education were in Australia, which really was to support the well-being of individuals and communities. And obviously we know that pro-social component is integral, but it perhaps wasn't as explicit. So I think the challenges sometimes with positive education is that there is a lot of overlap with a lot of different approaches and disciplines, and I think it is really important that we do clearly define what we mean by POSED. And I think it's great that we started this panel by doing that.
Rhiannon, I'm just going to pause you slightly because I think your connection is a little bit slow. But I think we've got the main bit of your answer there. So I'm just hoping perhaps later on that will come back.
Okay.
But yeah, so just because it's kind of slightly challenging to hear your point just now, but we can come back to that in a bit. But thank you. And moving over to Elke in Germany, could you talk us through the differences or similarities of character education and positive education where you are?
Thank you. I have to say, in Germany, positive education or well-being is still very early in its early stages. I almost think it's sort of pioneer state. It would be more defined as mental health education. And when I talk about character education in my workshops, I talk a lot about human values, or values that make us human in comparison, for example, to artificial intelligence, which is now moving more and more into education. So I emphasize on that. What is it that we need a teacher for in the future, for example? If we can get all the information online, and if we can get even good ways and explainer videos and everything to be academically educated, could we then actually spare the teacher? So that's a very valid question to ask. And then if you ask that, it comes quite quickly back, no, there's a lot of human stuff that we need teachers to teach kids, and kids need to teach kids together. And I think that's where positive education is at the moment getting broader, and looking more into two more aspects. I think it's one of them would be change management, which I get quite often consulted about, and the other one is future skills. So for me, character education is involving these two components as well.
Thank you, Elke. And just for my own edification, could you please give us a translation of the words in German?
Charakterbildung und the funny one, positive education. I tried whether I should actually translate that into German, and that would be positive Bildung. And I never could get really around it. So what I did in the end is I kept it. So I'm working with the German Association of Positive Psychology, and we kept it as positive education in English, even in Germany.
Because I find that very fascinating as a concept or an approach travels the seas. When you find the countries who don't have their own words for it, I think that often then you can see that in practice sometimes. And you're saying that you are in the early stages still in Germany.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I agree.
And then over to the US. So whereabouts do you find this at the moment?
Yeah, so over here, we also talk much more often about character education. And I think in schools around the US, especially in the Northeast where I am, we talk a lot about social emotional learning. And I do think the concepts of character education have shifted into social emotional learning. So we talk a lot about, we use the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning has some beautiful research and support for their social emotional competencies, which include self-awareness, self-management, pro-social skills, decision-making skills. And so that's how we think about character education in terms of supporting kids to grow in those social emotional competencies for the goals of well-being.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think just what you're saying then about the social emotional side of it. So for myself, I work a lot in special schools with children specifically and young people who have social, emotional, mental health issues. And from a lot of the schools that I've worked in the UK, I would say that underpinning a lot of what we're doing is positive education, is character education, is a mixture, but it's not necessarily in our vocab. But I would say in special schools, we have to, because of the nature of the young people that we work with. So that's interesting that social emotional comes back when we get to the US. Okay, so moving on, I really want to hear some more stories and some more examples of these things, these approaches working in practice. So I'd like to move over to Fabian and ask you, okay, so how has positive education worked out in your school or in your classroom? How does that work?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it is really important because I think, especially in the UK, character education, positive education, well-being is talked about more now. So it's kind of entered, especially in secondary schools. I'm an assistant ed in the secondary school and the director of character and well-being for our trust, the Odyssey Trust. But actually, within secondary schools now, there's a greater awareness of character education. But what have we actually done tangibly? And I guess our journey really began about 4.5, 5 years ago. So I've been at Townley for 6 years now. And really it starts with your values. And I think what a school needs to establish really clearly and from the outset are what are the school values and what is the purpose of the education. Now, character education I think is really about empowering students to realise avenues, potentials that maybe they hadn't really been exposed to previously. But alongside that, there needs to be, as you've all identified, a clear sense of well-being and a clear set of well-being principles. Because you cannot build character unless you have a positive and a happy individual. So what we've done at Townley and across the trust is really, we started off looking at how the house system could develop extracurricular opportunities. So it started off with elements of extracurricular in terms of yoga, in terms of meditation, public speaking, and now what we really developed is curriculum. I think it's fundamental that within each area, whether it is English or maths or science, there are opportunities where the school values that are established initially are referred to explicitly with the language, but then students can see the tangible outcome. So, for example, one of our key values is social conscience and helping students develop a social conscience. And I think what's been really interesting is seeing how different faculty areas, different department areas look at facilitating opportunities within the curriculum for students to develop a social conscience. So, for example, within humanities, perhaps there's a clearer link there. We look at protest movements in history. We looked at, within English, kind of decolonizing curricula and looking at how students can understand the past and in a better way develop a greater understanding of how the world works, but then they can see how their subject areas will help them facilitate that development in the future. So whether it's through careers or whether it's just an understanding that what they're learning isn't purely for learning's sake, it isn't just to get through the exam. And I think that's something we're really proud of and something we've developed substantially, but it's taken time. It isn't a case of, just kind of ticking a box and doing it over one term or two. It's at least a 3-year plan, and getting students to see that what they're learning isn't purely for the exam basis. There's a greater purpose for it. And we've developed over the last year a curriculum called 21C, which is knowledge rich, but at the same time helping students understand that they should want to learn and are given opportunities, not just to write down things and, to take their exams, but to debate, to discuss, to have symposia, to have active learning and active opportunities to discuss what they're learning. So there's a whole range of extracurricular, but really importantly, it's about the choices you make and given sufficient time within the curriculum to dedicate it towards character and positive education, but also training staff, and that's fundamental. And I know we're going to talk about the training of staff and students.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
Just before we go into the training itself, is that you're talking here really about giving the pupils a chance to understand that it's not just about exams, it's about learning, etc. Now, my experience of particularly the UK education system is it's not always just the pupils you have to persuade, but it could be other teachers, it could be governors, it could be local authorities, it could be academy trusts. So just going a step back, how did you discuss that kind of culture change at that level?
So it's a really good question. Fundamentally, I've been very fortunate. I'm on SLT now, but I wasn't 4 or 5 years ago. It's only been a year to have kind of support from senior leadership. And really, that's why the values are so important, because when you have a clear set of school values that say that learning is incredibly important and it isn't a matter of being an exam factory, then actually having those discussions with senior leaders, with governors, with staff, they kind of lend themselves naturally. But it takes time, because what we found is actually when you talk to parents and you talk to governors about the importance of having a whole school approach, developing the whole student and not just one small element of them, which is, the exam part. Actually, what we found is governors, parents are incredibly open to that. Within staff, because the UK system historically and still is, I'm not getting into the politics of it or the right or wrong, is still an exam-based system. Actually, with staff, it's been slightly kind of a longer journey than, say, with governors and with parents, because our whole training from PGCE or schools direct or from, 30, 40 years onwards to today is, we are functioning within the realpolitik of an exam-based system. So that's kind of been a longer process. But then when you can empower staff and say that within the curriculum, it's not just about the exams, you can it's important that you are nurturing this love of learning and giving staff the opportunity and the confidence, particularly at Key Stage 3. Because at Key Stage 3, there are no, external exams. It's a real opportunity. Staff love that, and they feel empowered, and they've responded really positively. So it has been sorry.
Fabian, just for our international audience, Key Stage 3 is 11-year-olds to...
Yeah, 11 to 14. 11 to 14.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Fabian. I think what I'm really hearing there is the importance of embedding this as well, and that's how it works essentially. Rebecca, can I go over to you and ask you a similar question about how have you seen positive education work? How have you embedded it within your school environment?
Well, one way that it's I think really important, especially right now, is to look at systems such as disciplinary systems and systems of referring kids to special supports and help, because what we're noticing is lots of inequities in our school systems. And so applying a framework like positive behavior intervention and support, which is its own area, but of like Fabian had said earlier, teaching children explicit character goals or school values that by creating explicit understandings of what we know children are capable of achieving and what we'd like to see in our communities, in our school communities, we are better able to set children up for success. And then when things go wrong, looking at behavior as communication and supporting children without sort of a really sharp punitive edge. We see over and over again that, for example, suspensions and detentions and things like that really may address symptoms of behavior problems in schools, but that don't teach children what to do and don't really solve the problem. So that's one way in which positive education in the form of systems change is starting to really impact schools. And I think there's right now in this country specifically, all of us are really thinking very deeply about social justice and inequities and affording all children the opportunities to learn and grow and achieve. So that's definitely one way. I think also there really is a strong emphasis on social emotional learning as an important area of education in itself, apart from the traditional academic subjects, but woven into the traditional academic subjects. We see that schools that have strong evidence-based SEL programs have better outcomes for kids, fewer disciplinary referrals, better GPAs often, and positive school culture is another thing that we really can look at and measure. And I think the measurement of all this, too, in my field in school psychology, is really important. That as we're implementing, whether it's social emotional learning programs or PBIS, positive behavior interventions and support programs, we need to make sure that things are going well, or at least we need to know when they're not. So by being very careful with measurement and progress monitoring, so that we can tweak programs as we go, is another important part of it.
Thank you, Rebecca. Could you just let us know what GPA stands for?
Oh, sorry, grade point average.
Yep. Okay, cool.
That schools think a lot about helping kids be academically successful.
Yes. So what I'm really hearing just from the few months we've had so far is that in order for this to be successful, in order for this to really support our young people, both emotionally and academically, we're looking for a real focus on values and embedding these approaches within the system. Rhiannon, I'm going to move over to you in a second and ask the same question, how you've implemented this. But just a quick reminder to the people who are watching, we do have a hashtag, Flourishing Ed. If you are over on Twitter right now, then please do that hashtag, especially if you've got any questions for our panel and you'd like to ask live. Okay, over to you, Rhiannon. How have you embedded the positive education approach within your school? How have you done this?
So I've been in two different contexts leading on. The first context was an all-girls Catholic school where I helped lead the implementation of the whole school approach. And then I've come to Geelong Grammar when they were about 10 years into their journey, and my focus has been quite different. It's about how you sustain positive education and how you continue to evolve. So what's worked in the first context doesn't necessarily work in the second context. And certainly whilst in my previous school I was able to see the evidence of positive education coming to life in the language and the culture of the school, it was already evident when I came to grammar, and our model emphasises learning, living, teaching and embedding positive education, and that speaks to a lot of what my colleagues have referred to this evening. And there is a strong emphasis on teacher training, and every staff member at our school who commences their journey at Geelong Grammar School engaged in a 3-day positive education course. So a very strong emphasis from top down, I suppose, in the school on the importance of that learning piece. And then, of course, we have a positive education subject, which we say provides the opportunity to teach the skills and practices of wellbeing explicitly. But then, of course, we have the implicit piece, as many others have referred to, where the emphasis is on incorporating the language of positive education in the broader school environment, and then embedding through policies and practices and ensuring that that message is consistent. And 11 or so years on for us, you know, we are at a change, to the point of change in our school. Like in every school, you need to continue to grow and evolve and keep your ears to the ground. And what positive education looks like in a year, 2 years or 3 years' time for us will probably be quite different, because, you know, schools are dynamic places and we just have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to engage our community. So that learning, teaching piece is really important, but now I'm really emphasising integrating. So do we need to call it positive education anymore? Is it time to really reintegrate into the broader educational picture? And that's where we're at the moment.
Great, thank you. You said that you have a specific lesson at the moment on positive education. Out of interest, I don't know much about the education system in Australia. How does that fit within any national curriculum that's set? How does that work?
So the Australian national curriculum does have what we call social and emotional competencies, drawing on a classical framework and social emotional learning. We have some positive psychology elements in our health curriculum, but there's no positive education subject in our national curriculum per se. The schools in Australia, like my own, who have taken positive education, many have chosen to create a subject. In our school, we teach positive education from early learning until year 10, and then in year 11 and 12, the last 2 years of school, there isn't so much room in the timetable, so POS Ed is integrated into the broader life of the school and what we might call pastoral care. So our students from early learning to year 10 have exposure to POS Ed for about an hour a week at least at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And could you just let us know as well, what age is year 10 for you in Australia?
About 15.
Okay, so
16,
they have it until then, and then it's kind of more embedded in other stuff in those later years. Okay, thank you. And I think what you said there really echoes. I did an education research trip last year in Finland, and they very much have that approach over there of that they're constantly developing, and their education has to be something that's constantly evolving. They're very, very forward thinking in that way, and that seemed to echo some of the things that you were saying about positive education might not be called positive education because it might have developed into something else, and that feels very similar to what I experienced in Finland as well last year.
Thank you for tuning in to the For Flourishing's Sake podcast. If you found this episode useful, please give it a 5-star rating on iTunes to help it reach more people, and please spread the word. Also, if you haven't already, remember to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. For Flourishing's Sake is available on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and Deezer. The book by the same name came out on Kindle on the 18th of June and will be out on paperback on the 21st of August. You'll find it on all the major online book retailer sites. It's jam-packed with evidence-based strategies for whole school positive education with case study examples from a wide range of schools from around the world. So why not order your Kindle copy now or pre-order your paperback so you'll receive it as soon as it's published. If you'd like to get in touch with questions or comments or to contribute to a future episode, please contact me via Twitter @FlourishingEd. You can also leave comments on individual episode pages on the forflourishingsake.com website. I look forward to hearing from you, and until next time, for flourishing's sake, have a great week.